Hey y'all, it's entry number 15 of this offseason series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Tee Higgins, wide receiver, Cincinnati Bengals. The positives with Tee Higgins. To start, let's talk about his quarterback play. Tee Higgins has one of the better quarterbacks in the league throwing him the ball in Joe Burrow. During the 2021 NFL season, Joe Burrow completed 366 passes on 520 passing attempts for 4,611 passing yards and 34 passing touchdowns in just 16 games. By having a solid quarterback, Higgins will have an easier time scoring fantasy points. Next, let's talk about his efficiency. Tee Higgins had solid numbers last year, with 74 receptions on 110 targets for 1,091 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. But it's also important to realize he was efficient in getting these numbers, as he averaged 2.43 yards per route run, 9.9 yards per target, and 1.97 yards per team passing attempts. These numbers were all top 10 among receivers in the NFL, according to Player Profiler. Next up, we have to talk about how Tee Higgins has wide receiver-friendly coaches. Over the course of his 54-game career as an offensive play caller, Zach Taylor's wide receiver room has averaged 13.87 receptions on 23.17 targets for 183.54 receiving yards and 0.93 receiving touchdowns per game. For reference, the league average wide receiver room in 2021 averaged 12.45 receptions on 19.75 targets for 155.55 receiving yards and 0.96 receiving touchdowns per game. By having wide receiver friendly coaches, it makes it easier for Tee Higgins to have a strong fantasy season. Moving on to the concerns with Tee Higgins. To start, we have to talk about his shoulder injury. Tee Higgins had labrum surgery on his left shoulder and waited until March to do it, after playing through the injury last season. We'll have to see if this injury recovery impacts his play at all for 2022. The next concern is that he's got another elite wide receiver on the team, so his volume may be limited. Tee Higgins is not the only good wide receiver on the Bengals. They also have superstar Jamar Chase, who put up 81 receptions on 128 targets for 1,455 receiving yards and 13 receiving touchdowns as a rookie. Having another elite wide receiver on the team may limit Higgins' volume relative to other top wideouts. Contested catch rate. During the 2021 season, Tee Higgins posted a contested catch rate of 25% on 40 targets, which only ranked 71st among wide receivers according to Player Profiler. Some additional thoughts on Tee Higgins. In terms of total fantasy points, during the 2021 season, Tee Higgins finished as WR17 in standard, WR22 in half PPR formats, and WR24 in full PPR formats. In half PPR formats, Higgins had 2 out of 14 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 4 out of 14 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 5 out of 14 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, and 3 out of 14 games with over 20 fantasy points according to fantasy data. Including the NFL playoffs, Higgins topped 100 receiving yards in 6 of his final 10 games. In terms of size, Tee Higgins is a bigger wide receiver, standing at 6'4" and weighing 215 pounds. The Bengals offense. The Bengals are looking like one of the most explosive offenses on paper going into the 2022 season. With no major weaknesses in their starting lineup, they were already an above-average offense last year, as they ranked 13th in total yards per game and 7th in points per game according to ESPN. By playing in an above-average offense, Tee Higgins will have plenty of opportunities to get yards and score. Tee Higgins actually had higher target share, wide receiver target share, air yard share, and targets per route than Jamar Chase during the 2021 NFL season, according to an article on fantasy data by Scott Rainier. Personal opinion. As of July 5th, 2022, Tee Higgins is going off the board as WR11, about pick 32 overall, on ESPN, and WR11, about pick 32 overall as well, on Yahoo. This seems to be around the appropriate range for him. Higgins is a tough player to gauge, since he's a very good player, and the offense looks even better on paper for 2022. But on the flip side, his average draft position is pretty high for a guy who has a good chance of being the number 2 target in his offense. He seems like more of a safe floor wide receiver than a high ceiling option in the 3rd to 4th round draft range of fantasy drafts in 2022. For each of these entries, we will mention a charitable cause or foundation that the player is passionate about. Tee Higgins has donated Hot Wheels cars to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America in the past. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's all for today's entry. If you have a player that you'd like to see covered in the video format of the Player a Day series, drop a comment below.